Yes.
How long will this trial last?
So I put this to the judge and the lawyer. I want to but she went to
Well, that's what alternatives are.
you only have one. And you were not very clear. It's right there. So, welcome to this event. I mean, it's called a memorial, but I think it's also a celebration, a big, that I think everybody here remembers and loves. And I want to tell you to start with that I'm not an expert in memorials. It's my first, and I hope my last one. But nobody is, I guess. But we've all been working very hard with the family to prepare this memorial. I hope you will have a fond remembrance, and it will help you accept Vic's passing. So in advance, I want to ask you to excuse me for any shortcomings in the organization or in the way the memorial takes place. Before we start, I would like to thank several persons, and I'm sure I will forget some of them, but Tracy Schaltemeyer, who is our head secretary in the mathematics department. Mrs. Wendy Simons, but she just disappeared, and she's the manager of the Alumni Center, who is here today, and her co-manager, Karen Ann Henry, Dr. Gears, who is the chair of our department, who will speak a little later, and has been very helpful and supportive, including financially. And my administrative assistant, Yutsi, who is over here standing, but you don't have to stand all the time. Okay. So without further ado, I think we will start the program and have Professor Jane Close Connolly, who is our interim chancellor and who has graciously accepted to come here and speak, despite being several times.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I do have the honor of serving as interim chancellor at UC Riverside. I regret that I never met Dr. Shapiro, but as I reflected on what I might say, I thought I could provide perhaps some historical context and illustrate what an important player Dr. Shapiro was in the development of the campus. I know we'll all learn more from the subsequent speakers specifically about his life's work. As you know, Dr. Shapiro joined our campus in 1964. That was the same time that Chancellor Ivan Hinderaker was chancellor. We know him now by the building and the coffee shop, but he was our longest serving chancellor. The campus was almost 10 years old and was then, as now, growing very quickly. It was undergoing the transition from a liberal arts college to a full-fledged research university. Dr. Shapiro witnessed the civil unrest that led to the formation of, for example, our Black Student Union and the other ethnic student associations that we have. He was here when we had speakers such as Cesar Chavez, Timothy Leary, and presidential candidate Eugene McCarthy. All of those came to campus, as did performers like Bob Dylan. And the student population began its meteoric increase. In fact, the first 10 years he was here, the number of students doubled. There were many firsts during the time he was active on campus. For example, the design for the landmark clock tower was approved in 1964, and our radio station, KUCR, was launched. While he was professor, we also instituted our professional schools, the School of Education in 1968, the Graduate School of Business Administration in 1970. He witnessed the development, actually, of most of the PhD programs. Only a few were in existence when he arrived. For example, chemistry was already a PhD program, but that was one of only a few. He served under 8 chancellors, and in fact, the chancellors he served under were rather historic. The first chancellor from an underrepresented group, Tomas Rivera. The first female chancellor in the entire UC system, Rosemary Schreier. And the first Latina chancellor in the entire UC system, Franz Cordova, were all chancellors during his tenure with us. Dr. Shapiro was clearly an important part of our history, a core contributor to the formation of the campus we know today, and a key component in UCR's development and growth. We treasure his contributions and those of other history makers that have been part of our campus, and we honor their memory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. In between the two speakers, I'd like to mention that I forgot to thank the family. I'm sorry. The whole family was here, particularly the children and the in-laws. Before I go on to the next speaker, I'd like to mention something. I had a dream or nightmare, I'm not sure how you would call it, 10 days ago, 12 days ago. And it went like that. Just before the program started, the memorial program, I wanted to go to the bathroom. And so I went. Of course, I didn't remember there was a bathroom just here in my dream. And I found myself in a hotel. I have no idea why. Under construction, a hotel under construction. And they were, after 5 or 10 minutes, looking everywhere for a bathroom on my way around. I found workers who told me, go through this room, which was under construction as well, find myself on the other side. Of course, there was no way to come back. And well, eventually, I don't know how I found my way back. And the chancellor had already spoken, and the provost was about to speak, which is the case.
Thank you, Dr. Lapidus. That was a rather interesting introduction. Well, good afternoon, family and friends of Professor Victor Shapiro. It is a real honor for me to have this opportunity to take part in this memorial service for Dr. Shapiro. As we will hear from other speakers, Dr. Shapiro was a very distinguished mathematician. He had a very distinguished career as a mathematician, and most of that career was spent here at UCR. Prior to coming to UCR, he had been on the faculty at Rutgers. He did research at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey, and then immediately prior to coming to UCR, he was on the faculty at the University of Oregon. And not only did he have a distinguished career at UCR, rising to the rank of distinguished professor of mathematics at UCR, the highest rank in the professorial series, but it is clear, I think, that Dr. Shapiro had a real love for mathematics. And he retired, became an emeritus professor, but at that point, he didn't quit doing mathematics. He continued doing mathematics, and at the time of his passing, he had a book that he was working on, and he has 3 articles in press. I hope that I can say that, or someone can say that about me, when that time comes for me. Now, Dr. Shapiro was an expert on trigonometric series and differential equations. He published extensively on these topics. His research over the years was funded by the National Science Foundation. His accomplishments were recognized by his being elected to several professional societies. But I think probably the one recognition that he received that maybe meant more to him than any other was in 1978 when he was elected by his colleagues at UCR to be the faculty research lecturer. The faculty research lecturer is the highest honor that our colleagues at UCR can bestow on one of their fellow colleagues. I would think that to him that probably was as meaningful as any of the other awards that he received. Now, Dr. Shapiro was also active in service. And as I was reviewing his service record, as I was thinking about what I might say today, there were 2 entries that caught my eye. And the first was that in 1973-74, he was a member of the executive committee of the College of Physical Sciences. And then the following year, he was a member of the executive committee of the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences. That was a very significant time for our campus because at that time, he clearly was actively involved in the merging of the College of Physical Sciences, the College of Life Sciences, and the College of Agricultural Sciences into the college that we have today, the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences. And I wish I had known that because I would like to have talked to him. We, as many of you might know, are right now engaged in an exercise where we are considering the redesign and the reorganization of the College of the Sciences at UCR. And I would like to have had the opportunity to talk with him to get his thoughts on how well that merger has worked over the past 40 years. Although I did not know Dr. Shapiro well, I frequently would see him and talk with him at various events. Most recently, last fall, at the welcome event for new faculty in the College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences. He was lively, energetic, enthusiastic, engaged, and that is the way I will remember Victor Shapiro. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Provost Rabinstein. And our next speaker, I think, is Dr. Gerhard Hirsch, who is the chair of the mathematics department and professor of mathematics. And
thanks, Michelle. Well, dear family, dear guests, it's my privilege to welcome you all in the name of our department, to the celebration of Dr. Shapiro's life. Dr. Shapiro was, as you just heard, one of the most distinguished members of our faculty and of our department. He was a true leader for our department. He helped to build a strong department in analysis. And after he retired in 1993 or 94, I think, he still stayed very active. I mean, we met often when he came in and I went out of the parking lot. And he had a great time telling me about this latest paper he is writing, his latest books he is writing. Actually, I think his latest book just got accepted about 2 months ago for publication. So that's kind of, for a mathematician at that age, quite an accomplishment. I think it's characteristic for the two great minds that they are still intrigued and enthused by their topic even at a large age, a high age. So he still went to our seminars and everybody was always happy to see him. Being faculty and students and staff alike enjoyed his presence and his cheerful personality. He also was very generous, not only with his time. He donated money for the Victor Shapiro lecture and analysis, which we have every year, and we will remember him through that. Yeah, I mean, you will hear many anecdotes and stories from the rest of us, from the rest of you. So I will start to turn it over now. And, well, we all will remember Vic Shapiro with great affection and admiration. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Richard Block, who is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Mathematics and been a long time scholar.
Even longer than perhaps many of you know. Victor's death leaves a gap in all of our lives, but we can take comfort in the fact that at the end he said that he had had a terrific life. An important part of that terrific life was his years in the mathematics department at the University of Chicago, where he received his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees. As it happens, like Victor, I also was born and raised in Chicago and received bachelor's, master's, and doctor's degrees from the Department of Mathematics of the University of Chicago. Victor got his PhD in 1952. I got mine in 1956. Later on, we referred to that era as the Stone Age. That's named after Marshall Stone, who was lured from Harvard to rebuild the mathematics department at the University of Chicago to its former glory and even beyond. And he brought in a number of really outstanding mathematicians, so that the department in that era was one of the handful of the great mathematics departments of the world. There really was none that exceeded it. Some of the luminaries on the faculty were Marshall Stone himself, Andre Vey, Saunders MacLean, Shin-Shen Chern, A. Albert, and Victor's advisor, Anthony Zygmunt. And there were also a number of outstanding up-and-coming younger faculty members such as Irving Kaplansky, I.E. Siegel, and Paul Helms. And Victor's thesis advisor was the great classical analyst Anthony Zygmunt. The faculty, the senior faculty, did give numerous graduate courses, and I had the privilege of taking a couple of courses from Zygmunt, even though I ended up mathematics. Zygmunt was a beautifully organized and clear lecturer, speaking in a soft-spoken manner with a lilting Polish accent. He was a refugee from Poland, and he was known as a kind and supportive advisor to his graduate students. Now, we as graduate students, we look forward to a life doing mathematics, discovering and proving new theorems, beautiful new theorems, we hoped, and I think Victor would say that mission accomplished. So now, years later, when Victor was at UCR, and I was at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, the senior algebraist in the department here left, and they had an open position for a senior algebraist. They made me an offer in 1967, which I turned down, but it was Victor who persuaded me in 1968 to accept the offer and come here. So I think you can thank Victor for the fact that Jane and I are here and have been part of this community ever since 1968. And so I recall that meeting at Victor's home then, back in 1968, with Vic and Flo, and I was just tremendously impressed by how gentle and loving Victor was toward his young sons at that time. It just left a lasting impression. Jane and I didn't yet have children, but it just left a lasting impression on how to be with one's children. So we remember Vic with fondness, and we will miss him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Block. So, actually, since you mentioned that, I also came here because of Vic. I wasn't going to say it, but in, when was it, 1990 or 91, I'm not sure. 1990, I think. I had met him a few times before, but I didn't know him very well. But he always wanted me to come here. And one day he met me at a conference. I don't remember which conference, somewhere in the US. And I told him, I was at the University of Georgia and about to move to Yale for at least a while. And but I told him my wife wanted to come back to California. And that was true. But before I had resisted it. But then I realized, if you know anything about vectors, when vectors go the opposite direction, they cancel each other. But if they go the same direction, and that's what's happening at that point. And he realized that, and he jumped on it, and 2 months later, or 1 month later, he called me and said, we have this senior position in analysis, we want you to have it. At least he wanted it. I don't know what about his colleagues. You'll be our number 1 on the list. Will you take it? And okay, and the rest is excluded. So I'm happy to now introduce Dr. Larry Harper, or Lawrence Harper, who is both a professor emeritus of mathematics and a former student of Vic. He got his degree at the University of Oregon in Eugene in 1965 under Shapiro.
I also came to UCR because of Vic, actually twice. Once as a graduate student, and the second time as a faculty member. Vic was a good guy, in my opinion. He probably would have preferred the Yiddish equivalent, a mensch. He was Chicago tough, but with a heart big enough for all people of goodwill. He was a pillar of every community to which he belonged. The U.S. Army, the Chicago School of Harmonic Analysis, the family that he and Flo created. His temple congregation, the UCR Math Department. And he was so proud of all those associations. He was consistently positive and productive, always leading by example. It was just 50 years ago at the University of Oregon that our relationship began. I had taken all the basic grad courses in mathematics and passed the qualifying exams, but realized that none of the paths they offered were a fit for me. I was interested in applying mathematics and solving problems. All the professors whose classes I had taken were oriented toward scholarship and theory building. In desperation, I signed up for Vic's seminar, even though I had never taken a class from him, because I had heard that he was more applied. After several weeks, the speaker, another graduate student, got stuck on an argument, and I filled in the gap. Afterwards, Vic told me, "Next week, you lecture." I was terrified. But following the book, I was able to muddle through and learn a great deal. After a couple of months, I gained the confidence to ask Vic if he had any thesis problems I might be able to solve. He gave me 3, and I chose the one that was the most combinatorial: harmonic analysis on the group 2 to the omega. In our 50 years together, his support as a mentor, colleague, and friend was unwavering, in spite of the fact that I chose to specialize in combinatorics and not harmonic analysis. I didn't always take his advice, but it was always good advice. After the service last month at the National Cemetery, I told Chuck about how it was around 7 years ago that Vic caught me swallowing a handful of Motrin at a departmental function. "Why are you doing that?" he demanded. "Pain in my back," I replied. "You gotta walk." That surprised me because I'd always been active. "How far do you walk?" 5 miles a day. I began walking a mile every day, and the pain started to subside. I now walk or jog 3 to 5 miles every day, and am free of pain. Thank you, Vic, and shalom. I miss you. We all miss you.
Thank you, Larry. Is Dr. Staffney here?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, great. So I'm happy to introduce Dr. James Staffney, who is Professor Emeritus of Mathematics. I take the mic.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Victor rarely used notes, but I'm going to make use of my notes. Okay, hello everyone. I'm James Staffney, and I've been a colleague with Victor here at UCR for over 40 years. In that time, we've had several hundred mathematical conversations. I would like to illustrate Victor's what? Oh. Can everybody hear me now? Okay. Okay. I'm James Staffney. I've been a colleague of Victor's for over 40 years. In that time, I've had several hundred mathematical conversations with Victor. I would like to illustrate Victor's intense interest and enthusiasm for mathematics by briefly describing 2 of our recent conversations. Okay, several weeks ago, we were on the phone. I told him I was working my way through an interesting result in Molly Vaughn's thesis. Victor's reply: "I met Molly Vaughn at the Institute when I was there in the early 50s. But what is the result you're interested in?" he asked me. I read Victor the theorem, and he said, "That's a very interesting result. when you get the details of the proof worked out, will you come over and give me a lecture on it? Of course, Victor. About 2 weeks later, I appeared at Victor's house at about 8 in the evening. We sat down at his dining room table with the details of the proofs before us. I said that since it's rather late, I'll just sketch the main ideas for you. Okay. I read the first item, and Victor leaned over the table and read it again. He said, "This is an interesting item. I want to go through the proof in detail. I want to see the details." We did that, and Victor's question showed that he clearly understood the proof in that short time. He was always good about picking up proofs, it seemed to me. When we moved to the next item, he was again intrigued and wanted the details again. And so it went. Now, understand, it's getting later, and Victor is now 88 years old. But no, this is not unusual. This is exactly the way our conversations have gone for the last 30-some years. Victor's enthusiasm never waned. About 2 weeks later, we were again on the phone. I said that I was working through a very interesting paper of Wolfgang Fuchs. Victor replied, "I met Fuchs at the Institute." I met Fuchs at the Institute in the early 50s. But what is his result? I read the theorem, and Victor said, he paused, he said, "That's a very good theorem. When you get the details of the proof worked out, will you come over and give me a lecture on it?" Of course, Victor. But as it turned out, that conversation was not to be. 3 days before Victor died, I visited him in the hospital with a little less, I visited him in the hospital. Okay. With a little less than his usual gusto, he gave me his game plan. Okay. He would move to rehabilitation. I'm a little nervous, you can see. He would move to rehabilitation and then move permanently into Sunrise, an assisted living facility in Riverside. He would move his computer and some of his materials there so that he could continue working on his second book. He briefly described his plan for the next 4 chapters to me. That was my last conversation with Victor. I will miss my conversations with Victor very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, the first person who told me about Vic having broken his hip was Jim Staffman. I'm grateful to him for that. Actually, the last time I saw Vic was at the Fellows, the reception for the Fellows of the American Mathematical Society. We've both been elected, along with Richard Block here, as Fellows of the American Math Society in the inaugural class, and he was there. And it was a little more tired than usual. He was this chap. But we went and sat with my wife at this table at some point, and we talked for a while. And at some point, the master of ceremony asked if anybody wanted to sing. And Vic said, yes. And he went to the podium and he started singing for a short while, but he was the only one who did. Okay, so the next speaker is Dr. Shawnee McMurran, and she's professor of mathematics at California State San Bernardino, and she's a former PhD student of Dr. Shapiro here. I think I was on your PhD committee, wasn't I?
Perhaps.
I believe so, but I'm not sure. Actually, maybe not. It was in '91. No, probably not. I wasn't there. I don't remember that.
I remember that. I saved a lot of money because of that. I'm going to work from my notes. I'm going to share 3 of my favorite memories of Professor Shapiro. When I was a student, both graduate and undergraduate, if a course or seminar had anything to do with differential equations, I would be there. And more often than not, Professor Shapiro would be there to teach it. I think anyone who has heard him lecture will be familiar with the following scenario. You got a picture of chalkboard, right, covered in mathematical results. Some arrows pointing here, some arrows pointing there. And Dr. Shapiro, at the only space left to right on the blackboard, saying, now, it follows from lemma, and there would be an asterisk, lemma star, and result dagger over here, and proposition double dagger, because he always labeled his results this way, and result double asterisk, and maybe, this sentence about label, the section symbol, right? He always used these sorts of notes. And from which the proof of some impossible theorem would all come together. And at this point, our professor, like a magician, would turn and stand with this immense grin on his face, entreating us to see the beauty of the mathematics we had just witnessed. How could we not respond to that infectious smile of Dr. Shapiro? You had to. And although most classes focused on the business of mathematics, every now and then Professor Shapiro would give us a glimpse of his life beyond being our math professor. We might hear a story about him coming across the various people he met at the Institute, and we'd all be in awe, of course. Anticipating a night out dancing with his wife, he would tell us about that, or an accomplishment of one of his children. He was so proud of them. And in the fall and in the spring, he would always honor the memory of the friends that he lost in battles during the war. Finally, my experience as a graduate student. First, I can't express how honored I felt when Professor Shapiro agreed to be my advisor. I was terrified asking him, and I was so pleased when he said yes. As I worked on my thesis, each week or so, I would bring in my most recent results. Dr. Shapiro would read through my work, perhaps nodding a bit, perhaps not, but giving little indication of what he was actually thinking. Then he would inevitably say something along the lines of, "You're making progress, McMurrin, but there's a hole in your proof." He never indicated where the hole was. And from there, I was sent on my way to repair the leak and work a little bit more. From this experience, I did develop a tremendous skill at finding holes in proofs. One day, in late winter or early spring, I brought in my latest results, anticipating this typical response. Dr. Shapiro read them through and said, "Okay, you're done." It was like a sucker punch. I never saw it coming, and there I was, tossed out into the real world. I love my job. I have the opportunity to do mathematics every day, and I would not be doing what I do if not for Victor Shapiro. He had a profound influence on my life, and I hold him in the highest regard. He will be missed. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tony. So our next speaker is Dr. Malampati Rao, or M.N. Rao as we know him familiarly, and he's a professor of mathematics emeritus since recently at UCL.
The first time I met Dr. Shapiro was in 1970 when I came here to give a colloquium talk. Of course, I was thinking of leaving. Before that, I was at Carnegie Mellon. I was thinking of leaving that place there and come to a warmer climate, which is on the West Coast, of course. And before, 4 years before, I came and visited Irvine. I was made an offer there I saw, and the analysis group wasn't there. Of course, I would be one of the first people, and I didn't want to go. I declined. And in '70, when I came, of course, there was this little idea that maybe we would like you to come here. So I was not sure. Of course, the people also told me to think of Santa Barbara. Maybe I could do that. But I was looking for some good analysis group already there. Somebody who is very good in that. And when I came and saw, of course, the two people, one in analysis, that is Victor Shapiro, and in topology, Jones was there, and of course Jones wrote me a letter afterwards, personally inviting me to come here. It would be much better and so forth. So I came here 2 years later, because I was going to the Institute for Advanced Study for those 2 years. And so after coming here, we went on in everything very well. Offices were opposite to each other on the third floor of the Sproul Hall. And every day going to lunches, we always discussed on everything in the world. And so one of the things we wanted to talk about was, well, in physics, Einstein is the greatest person. So among the presidents of the United States, or politicians in general, who will be corresponding to the Einstein station? Well, we were thinking of everything. And finally, we came down to Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence. And of course, later I also read about Thomas Jefferson on his tomb, written as he is the author of the Declaration of Independence, but not that he was the president. Somebody asked, Mr. President, you were the third president, why not? He said, anybody can become president, but not anybody can write the Declaration of Independence. So that's the great thing. So that's the way we have been. And here, I always had a seminar in mathematics, in spite of the fact each of us have to teach 2 classes. And I was not taking any credit, but I wanted to, because before coming here, I always had a seminar at Carnegie Mellon. I did the same thing here. So Shapiro came time, and as I said, of course, we discussed various things, and we have common interest in analysis. So he said, you know, one of my students would like to have in function spaces something in circular spaces. Can you cover it? I said, yes, of course. And Shani was the student at the time, Shani McLaren, and so we extended and then had it. And I think she did a good job in class, all the assignments and everything else was done quite well. So, and thereafter, we have, both of us, have introduced two new courses here. He introduced the history of mathematics. It was taught for a while. And I introduced non-standard analysis. So they continued, both of them died. We both retired, and I'm still alive, of course, that's the thing. But the most interesting thing is the history of mathematics we taught alternately. I taught from ancient to 16th century, and he taught from 17th century to present. And what he was doing, of course, was also part of the thing that he gave the lecture for the University of the Vice Chancellor. That's pointed out. And he wrote quite a ancient ones, I always came, and then there are the Bernoullis, there are 7 of them, all mathematicians. The father of Bernoulli, the son, and the Holy Spirit of mathematics, we used to say. And so they are all there. And in so doing, of course, I have done, made the students to work hard and present a term paper. And one of the students has published the term paper in College Mathematics Journal. And I don't know whether that was the reason or not. After a couple of years, that's 85, I think, or 86, the academic press was publishing the Encyclopedia of Physical Sciences. So they asked me to write an article on history of something, particularly probability. So I wrote an article on history of probability. It was published in 87, and the second edition came in 92. I expanded a little bit. And the third edition of the same thing came in 93, expanded a little bit more. And all of this, we are doing and his lecture came in the publication of the UCR, the Senate lecture, and mine the other way around. So we do things in this way. And Victor also is always interested in ranking people, who is better and who is not, who is higher and who is not. And not only in mathematics, but in other areas. Other areas I told you about the president. In mathematics, one of his friends was Walter Rudin, who is a very good analyst. And his wife, Mary Ellen Rudin, is a topologist, he's also a very good topologist. So he wants to know who is better of the two. Because it's always, there's a kind of arguing between. So the topologists say Mary Ellen is one of the best topologists. And analysts, of course, Victor being one of the analysts, he thinks Walter is the better one. And finally he came to the conclusion that, well, both of them are equally good. So we just settle with that. So that's the kind of thing. And after some time in the late 80s, we had a senior position in mathematics. The University of California system is such that if somebody retires or resigns, the position goes down to assistant professor. Then you have to get up step by step. So that time we talked about, and so there was a committee, and I was the chair of the selection committee. So a few people were invited and on. So he came and told me, I'm interested in Michelle. So please see that we would like to have it. Okay, we will have it. And of course we selected him. And we were very happy, and there Michelle was in that sense. There was somebody else also who was trying to come, who was pointing out how many people he has published, infinitely many papers and all those things. But didn't match with our thing anyway somehow. So these are various things. Wherever we go, we some kind of complemented but go together, made a good analysis group. And for my coming here, it's not just analysis by itself only, but we had 2 very good algebras. Usually there are not that many algebras in many places. In Carnegie there was only one, and I was there. And here it was Richard Bloch and Jack Radcliffe, both of them were there, and both top-notch algebras. And that gave an attraction to me to come. And that was not the case at Irvine, so I didn't want to go there. And of course, there is a good analysis group, and we did various things. So it was a happy situation, but it's gone by the way. Of course, even after retirement, we both wanted to see. He published a book 2 years ago. So what are you doing? Well, I published the year after another book, and so he's working on a different one, and that is one of his students, the very first one, not very first one, the when I came for my first year, Di Fiore, he wrote a thesis he never published. So why don't you publish the good thesis? Di Fiore said, I forgot everything. This is what Victor told me. So if you want, you can do and publish. So he said, okay, I'll do that. He was working on that. And that was just before. And of course, our achievements, and then analysis, the functional analysis seminar we used to call it, became analysis seminar. I think it's just essential to be functional. So, that was thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rao. Actually, I want to mention that Dr. Rao postponed his trip. He had a trip planned for this weekend and the rest of the week, I guess. But he postponed his trip because of the memorial. So we're very grateful for that. Our next speaker is Professor Albert Strauka.
Yes.
Always used to call him Al. And I saw him this week.
In an elevator. I'm
In
standing
an
in
elevator.
the courthouse, and up I hear Al, and there's Michelle in the
Yeah.
elevator.
So because I'm on jury duty of all things, in addition on criminal trial.
I escaped.
Right.
The trial I would have been on would have gone through June. I am worthy of sympathy of all sorts. First, Richard, did you tell Jane you turned down the offer to go to California in 1967? What did she say? Secondly, Professor Lapidus, that's what your name is, even though it's not really your name, because of Victor Shapiro. Your students call you Lapidus and all kinds of other things. Vic and Flo had encountered Michelle, apparently at lots of meetings. Maybe it only happened twice, but he made such a big impression that for years we heard about Michelle Lapidus. You impressed him very much. And I suspect you impressed Flo very much because it mattered a great deal what Flo thought about things. Well, I was going to be very simple and just show you a picture, but then I saw the picture standing out in front there, so I have to say some other words. This is one of the nicest pictures I've ever seen, this thing. And it was sitting on my bulletin board for years and years. And I spent about 45 minutes digging through the rubble in my office to find an actual photograph. I think this tells more about Vic than anything else. I don't know if that's a Jane could say whether this is a well-executed dance step or not, but I think it's pretty spectacular. Is it on there? What do you think? Is that a great picture? I came here in '67 with Tom Paine, Bruce Chalmers, Neil Gretzky, Keith Odson. Right then, the faculty had 3 full professors: Vic Shapiro, Burton Jones, Howard Tucker. Howard Tucker left after that year to go to the University of California at Irvine. So essentially, at that point, the department had 2 faculty members. Shawnee was concerned about being accepted by Vic Shapiro. You have it wrong. Victor loved being a thesis advisor. He could take on hundreds of children. And his attitude was, well, he didn't come to see me for 6 months, but when he's ready, he'll come and talk to me about whatever he's been doing in that time. His attitude was, if you want to work on mathematics, I'm here to work on mathematics. If you don't want to work on mathematics, I'm not going to worry about it. And in a sense, I'm trying to figure out how that was. Vic was a serene person in some sense. He didn't let things that were unnecessary bother him. He just went straight to wherever he was going. Now, I don't think Vic ever taught calculus here. I don't think he taught very many undergraduate courses. I don't think he taught very many introductory graduate courses. What his job was to do was to teach advanced seminars, advanced courses. The courses he taught, I was talking to Bill Okamura in that wonderful intellectual center, Ralph's. And it sounded a lot like what happens in chemistry. You come and you start working in the direct path to your research. So Vic used to teach these courses which could take somebody from whatever level, and if you stayed with him long enough, you could be writing a dissertation if you had talent. It was like that. The rest of us waste lots of time with other kinds of stuff. But he never really, I would hate to see him, well, he's probably a great teacher of off-sequence calculus or something. He never had that experience. And I think some of his colleagues probably thought, well, they should be treated like that. They should have those kinds of courses. They should just teach advanced graduate students. But they also would have to be able to accept graduate students who came to work with him. And they would have to have such a wealth of problems for students to work on that they could support all those graduate students, which Vic did. And that always come up to his children. Was he a good father? Well, as best we can tell, his children taught him a lot because he kept coming and telling us all the wonderful things his children taught him. And he thought we should learn. Artie was the last one, right? So apparently Artie learned a lot from his siblings, and he passed it on to his father. And dancing. That picture of Victor dancing, he was big on dancing. I'll give you that picture back before you lose it. And he was always extolling dancing. That's what one did. Did your mother love to dance too? Did he love to dance because she loved to dance, or was it a mutual thing? Mutual. Well, they went to math meetings together. Your poor mother got to listen to stuff she couldn't possibly comprehend, but she put up with it. Well, that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much for the first interactive talk. Adolfo is here, right? Yeah, so earlier. But before you come, I'd like to say something. So there will be a meeting of the American Mathematical Society here at UCR in the fall, in November, early November. And well, I happen to be the Associate Secretary for the American Mathematical Society for the Western US and Canada, so I'm in charge of that meeting. And I had already a special session that I was co-organizing on a different subject, but when Vic passed away, I quickly decided that we should organize a special session in his memory. And the reason why I mention it before Adolfo speaks is that the first person I thought of co-organizing this session with me was Adolfo Rombos. And he accepted it graciously, immediately. And so we will have a special session which will be called From Harmonic Analysis, which was his first subject, to Partial Differential Equation. It's basically his itinerary in mathematics. And it will, and in the subtitle is in memory of Victor Shapiro. And Adolfo will be a co-organizer, and who is that? I'm sorry. Trouble. Adolfo, help me. Alfonso, yes, of course I know it. I blanked out. Thank you, Adolfo. Alfonso Castro.
Okay. Michelle said, I'm Adolfo Rumbos. I'm a professor of mathematics at Pomona College in Claremont. About a month ago, a good friend of mine told me about Vic's passing, but I'll never forget the way she mentioned it. She left a phone message and she said, I know that Vic has been a very important man in your life, so I wanted you to know. And so I've been thinking about that, all this time, because Vic was very important to me, not only professionally, but also in my personal life as well. I met Vic when I was a graduate student at the University of California in Santa Cruz in 1987. He and Flo used to go there and visit Ed Landesman and Harold Whittam also. By then I was a student of Ed Landesman. And I'll never forget the first time I met him, because when I was a graduate student, I would run this seminar with other graduate students. I was just getting started on working on resonance problems, nonlinear PDEs, and Vic happened to be there, and I guess Ed Landesman told Vic that I was teaching was running the seminar. I wasn't teaching, the seminar for graduate students, and he went and sat in the seminar. Okay, so here's Vic, well-known person in nonlinear harmonic analysis and nonlinear PDEs, and he's sitting there paying attention to what I was saying. And I'll never forget that, because that really strikes me as one of the most striking features about Vic, is that he was interested in everybody, anything. You could be telling him about anything you were doing, even if it was not, you wouldn't think it was interesting, he would be paying attention. So Vic was one of the main reasons why, when I was offered the position at, when I was being interviewed at Pomona College, that I really wanted to do that, because I wanted to be close to where Vic was. So I came to Pomona College in 1991, and first thing I did, even when I was being interviewed, was drove to Riverside and met with Vic. In 1994, 95, so he was already, I didn't realize he was already retired by then, but he was still working. So I spent my sabbatical here at UC Riverside. And of course, I attended Vic's seminar. I forgot what it was at the time, but it was some kind of nonlinear PDEs. And I remember that I think I lectured on variational methods, and he got really interested in those problems. And he tells me, I worked on this thing a while ago, but I didn't really publish it. So we started working on this, and several papers came out of the work on applying variational methods to nonlinear PDEs. And I do remember when, at that time, we had this conference in his honor with Michelle and helped organize. He said it was one of the things he was really proud of this paper, because it was one of the papers where he first used the Palais male condition. Palais and Ismail were two people he had met at the Institute for Advanced Study. So I just want to end by saying that I'll never forget Vic when I would call him or someone visit him and Flo, how interested he was in what I was doing, but he get even more interested when he was telling you about what he was doing at the time. His latest book, his latest article, and his face would light up, his eyes would light up, and he would start talking. But I'll never forget that he would get even more radiant when he would talk about his children, he would talk about his grandkids. He was very, very proud of you all. Thank you.
Actually, Adolfo has mentioned this conference we organized upon the retirement of the Shapiro, and I have brought the volume in case somebody wants to see it. It was called Harmonic Analysis and Nonlinear Differential Equation. Adolfo, Larry Harper, and I were co-editors for and it was called a volume in honor of Victor Shapiro. It appeared in, it was published by the American Mathematical Society in Contemporary Mathematics series. And your paper is in it. I just checked. With Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Jack Ratcliffe, and he's Professor Emeritus of Mathematics. He was already mentioned several of the talks.
Good afternoon. Chancellor Connolly was talking about 1964, and that seems like only yesterday. When Vic first came here, it was 1964. He was a great friend of all of us, and to me, he was a wonderful friend and colleague for 49 years. He came in 1964, and I came the year before. At that time, the math department was located on the first floor of Watkins Hall. We had a faculty of about 12, and every day at noon we all grabbed brown bag lunch and walk across a big parking lot where Sproul Hall now is, and go to the barn to eat lunch and talk about our research under the big oak tree at the barn. On one of those conversations, our chairman, Malcolm Smiley, seemed especially happy and pleased, and so we asked him why, and he said he had just gotten confirmation that Victor Shapiro was going to join our staff, our faculty, the next school year. And at that time, even back then, Vic was a world-class mathematician, so he was a very big catch for our department. A very small department catching somebody that good. After Vic, maybe I should, as an aside, say that at that time, UCR was known as Chicago University of the West. And you know, Vic loved Chicago University, so maybe that helped him decide to come here. In any case, after he got here, our lunches, our conversation became more enthusiastic because Vic, as you know, is very enthusiastic about his research in all of mathematics, and so it was catching. At that time, I was a bachelor, and after a couple of years, my parents decided to live with me. So I was asking around where would be a good place to buy a house, and immediately Vic said, why don't you move to the new development where we're living about a mile east-northeast of the campus? And I did, and as the department grew, an awful lot of other mathematicians moved there, so I think he had the same conversation with them. There was Burton Jones, Jim Staffney, John B. Pillis, Bruce Chalmers, Larry, well, he's no longer here, me, and then a couple of blocks, and we were within 2 blocks, a couple of blocks further away was Dick Block and David Rush. So we are all close to Vic. It was just maybe a happenstance. In any case, Vic and Flo, his wife Flo, loved to go for a walk shortly after sunset. And my mother and I did like to go for a walk. And after I got married, my sweetheart and my darling wife, Georgia, also liked to go for a walk. And on those walks, we frequently met Vic and Flo. And so we'd have a brief conversation, and we left the conversation feeling uplifted. It was clear to everybody that Vic and Flo were very much in love and very happy together, and that just seemed to catch, and you felt uplifted, and you felt a little happier from the conversation. I'm going to very much miss our same Vic, and I'm very sorry that he's not going to be around to be a friend to us anymore.
Thank you very much, John. Our next speaker is John Pillis. I wish he could draw a cartoon for you, because he's an incredible
cartoony skills.
Thank you, Michelle. You know, it's interesting as I'm sitting here, it's the same Vic Shapiro in how many different ways he's reached out and touched each of us. As for me, first of all, I want to say I feel very honored to be here before the family, children, Chuck and Audie and Pam and Laurie, and Chancellor Connolly and Provost Robinson. Now, people are remembered very often by grand things. As far as my experience with Vic is concerned, there are the little unplanned things that somehow make you memorable sometimes. It's not exactly as one colleague mentioned to me once, that you have to teach for 30 years before you get some kind of feedback from a student. And then what they say is, oh yes, you were the one with the heels that will always run down. So I hope you have better shoes now. It's something different. But Vic, for example, when Susie and I came to Riverside in the mid-60s, I knew Vic was a very well-known and solid mathematician, always enthusiastic. And when he said, as he probably said to Jack, you know, I think you should buy a house here. Now, what that meant to me was that I could now overcome my insecurity and paranoia because I was a fresh PhD, and every day of my life after getting my PhD from Berkeley, being with those giants of mathematics over there, I knew someone was going to sneak up behind me and grab my PhD away from me. And I had that insecurity until Vic said, buy a house. Welcome. Now, if I were Drake, then he wouldn't say that. So I took that as one of those little things that he probably wouldn't remember, but it still gave me a reinforcement. So the imposter syndrome that I had suffered evaporated on that day, thanks to Vic. That was one thing. Now, Vic's enthusiasm for mathematics and almost everything was very palpable. And so when I was chairman, the opportunity arose, with Vic's cooperation, of course, to invite Anthony Zygmunt, his advisor from Chicago, to Riverside. And it wasn't just an ordinary colloquial invitation. We wanted to make a big a big poof over it. So we called the press enterprise and had an article written. And we're very happy, I think, Vic and I, to assemble a presentation of this great mathematician to the community of Riverside, because Riverside had this resource and they should have known about it. So that was a pleasant experience with Vic. And Michelle mentioned the cartooning thing. I happen to have done a portrait of Zygmunt, but that's another story which I'll leave aside. Now, Vic, being a world-class mathematician, always had this enthusiasm for the history of mathematics, the arc of mathematics, as MM indicated. We want to teach the history, to know the context in which you are a part, and if you are a contributing part, so much the better. So now, let me present you with an observation that I think Vic would have enjoyed. After I got over my paranoia and imposter syndrome, I started to think of what was my job as a research mathematician, and it's to recognize patterns and to somehow fill in the structure that possibly other people hadn't seen. Otherwise, it wouldn't be original research. Well, that reminds me of the story that illustrates this point of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, who went on a hiking camping trip, and at the end of one day, they're on their backs with their hands behind their head, looking up at the clear, clear night sky. And Sherlock Holmes says to Watson, Watson, when you look up, what comes to your mind? Watson says, well, Holmes, I think of the vastness of the universe, that we are all products of this celestial soup that started billions of years ago, and how insignificant we are, yet such as mud that sits up and becomes conscious of itself, we are at the same time meaningful, significant, large, and not small. And Sherlock says, you think all of that, Watson? Yes, says Watson. What do you think, Sherlock?
Sherlock says, I think somebody stole our tent. So Sherlock had seen something that maybe most people wouldn't have seen. And I tried to put myself in that position. It doesn't happen often, let me tell you. Now, another thing that Vic never made an issue of, but it was part of him. He was a gentleman, a sweet man, and as you've heard from others, always enthusiastic. And I don't know how he did it, but with all the tribulations, being in the Army, you never heard from Vic a foul word or a bad word about anybody. That is really something that impressed me, and he was, in the truest sense, a gentleman and a scholar, and I'm so proud to have known him and profited from him. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Dr. Mary Margarita Lechner, and she's professor of mathematics at Riverside Community College here in Riverside. And she's also a former PhD student of Dr. Shapiro and graduated in 1993, I think. Correct me. I was on your committee there.
Hi. I'm going to read from this as I'm nervous, but I think it's best in these occasions to remember the gifts people give to us. Of course, I'm not strictly speaking of material items, but rather I'm referring to the wisdom, the lessons, and the insights people learn and share with one another. Dr. Shapiro was not only my teacher, he was my mentor. I cherish the gifts he gave to me. He always treated his students with respect. He understood and appreciated that we were all individuals. I remember when I was an undergraduate, he would call us by our last names, Ms. Legner, Mr. Smith, etc. He knew the importance of fostering students' connection to the class. Though we all have taken different paths, I still have a sense of connections to my fellow peers. Through his example, he taught me to be patient, encouraging, positive, and demanding of myself. He taught me to be detailed and persistent in my work. These are the gifts he shared with me. These are the traits I strive to practice as a professor. These are the traits I strive to instill in my students. I recall the summer before Martha Contreras, who was his second to last student, who's no longer with us, and I were done with so the summer before we were done with our dissertations, we would take turns presenting papers. I thought it was funny Dr. Shapiro would ask me to present the papers that were written in French or Portuguese, two languages which I know next to nothing. I guess he figured math was math and I would muddle through the material and figure it out. Dr. Shapiro has taught me the importance of relating to others by sharing personal experiences. He understood the important lessons life teaches us. For example, he told us about his experience as a medic in the Pacific in World War II. He described being on the side of the hill under fire and the misery of all the injured soldiers. Perhaps he intended to help the math students put their misery into proper perspective. Finally, I'll never forget, whenever I got stuck or frustrated with my research, he would tell me, I didn't walk, he would tell me, Mary, go ride your horse. Thank you, Dr. Shapiro.
Thank you, Mary. Our next speaker is Dr. James Kellier, and he's Associate Professor of Mathematics here at UCR.
Thanks, Michelle. I got a job here at UCR 5 years ago. And as part of the job getting process, you give a job talk, which can be pretty much a nervousness-inspiring event. And it's getting close to the talk time, and nervousness is building up. And so I guess I was giving slide talks, and the slides go down, and everyone's taking a seat. And just before then, I see an older gentleman come, well, shuffling. Okay, he walked a little more spryly back then than he did towards the end. And he sits down in the middle of the front row. well, in math talks, no one sits in the front row because we don't really like to get close to the speaker, to be honest. And so, you know, it's a little bit unusual, but whatever. So I started to talk to him, you know, I'm a little bit nervous for sure. And I looked down and I see him, and he's smiling. He's nodding his head, and he's obviously very engaged, right? And so I pretty much focused on him through most of the talk. I didn't just stare him in the eye. He relaxed me. And I was thinking I'd give him a much better talk because of it. And at the end of the talk, he comes up and shakes my hand and he says, well, you know, he introduced himself. And he said, you know, I'm an emeritus professor here, but if I could vote, you know, I would vote for you. Which was a very nice thing for him to say, very welcoming. And I did end up getting the job, which was not just because he made it, but I gave him a little bit of credit. And then in my time here during the last 5 years, even though he was an emeritus professor, and he didn't really come in all that often, he would come in pretty much every Tuesday, and we had the functional analysis seminar, and then referred to. And I, by the way, am the one who changed the name to analysis, so you can blame me. And we would often, well, actually, we very seldom have an outside speaker. It would usually be either Jim Staffney or Victor or MM will speak or a few other people. And it was this great collegial kind of seminar because Victor was always very, very interested in making sure that everyone understood perfectly clearly, every detail was understood, not just by him, but by everyone, if possible. He always sat in the front, in the middle, which I realized had nothing to do with me. It was because that was his habit. And it was just this wonderful experience in a seminar, which I don't think I've ever attended seminars quite that fun, actually, in the end. And I learned a tremendous amount, and he was a very inspiring person. He had a lot of positive energy, had these incredible enthusiasms, and he was just a beautiful man, and I'm thankful that I got to see him for the last 5 years of his life.
Thank you, James, for sharing your impression and your remembrance with our next speaker is Dr. John Fay, and he's professor of mathematics at Shapiro College in Rancho Cucamonga, and a former PhD student of Dr. Shapiro. He graduated here at UCR in 1986.
Thank you, Michelle. When Michelle asked me to come and talk here, he suggested I talk about my experiences as one of Vic's PhD students. And so I've thought back to moments we had together and the meaning that I could draw from them. And so I present to you today some of Victor Shapiro's maxims for doing mathematics, and by extension, for living. I don't know how it happened, but somehow when my wife and I first got married, we ended up living in the same neighborhood as Vic did. And so sometimes we'd walk home from school together, and leaving campus one day, we were walking along, and he shared with me his secret for success in mathematics. He said, work 11 hours a day, every day. First maxim, be active. Another time, before I was a student, when I was taking a class from him, so a student in that sense, it was late winter or early spring term, and he shared with the class, there aren't a lot of good ideas in this business. I had one last May, he told us. Another time after I was his student, he told me about a conference he went to once where he attended a talk given by an acquaintance of his. And because it was an acquaintance of his, he didn't think he'd have any mathematical connection, but he found during the talk, he said, the precise technique I needed for the topic I was working on at the time. Second maxim, be open to ideas whenever and wherever they arise. When I was working on my dissertation, I was sharing with Professor Shapiro a theorem from another paper that I've been reading that I wanted to use to help prove my result. And he informed me that I was not allowed to use it until I had worked through the proof myself and understood all the details. He said that was the way mathematics should be done. And so from that, I get the third maxim, be true. And lastly, still working on the dissertation when I was setting up the hypotheses for what would become the major theorem in the dissertation. He listened to the list of hypotheses I had, told me that before I could proceed with that, I had to produce an equation that satisfied all those hypotheses. That it wouldn't do to produce a theorem that perhaps had no application. So fourth maxim is be useful. And just one thing that I hadn't planned on mentioning, but hearing Chicago mentioned a number of times and knowing how much he loved his university there, I have to give you the phrase that he often told me, University of Chicago, not a good university, just the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. We are all the wiser for all these maxims. So, let's see, yes. So I'm supposed to read a letter now. It's a letter by another former student of Vic Shapiro. He graduated here at UCR in 1970 as Dr. Gary Lichtman, professor of mathematics and computer science at California State University, East Bay in Hayward. And he wrote me a very heartfelt message after the first announcement on Scottsmail to the whole university community. And I offered that, and he told me he could not come, unfortunately, here, but I offered that he write a letter, and he did, and so I'm going to read it on his behalf. My family and I are deeply saddened by the passing of Professor Shapiro. He was definitely one of the finest teachers I've ever studied with, particularly because of his broad knowledge, his great enthusiasm, and his attention to details in the courses I took from him. As a former undergraduate student majoring in engineering and physics as well as mathematics, I was literally thrilled to be taking the courses Professor Shapiro taught, especially because my knowledge of physics was broadened and deepened by learning the mathematics supporting subjects I had previously studied as an undergraduate student. I chose to work on a dissertation with Professor Shapiro because of his outstanding teaching, the connection of his work to physics, and because I felt that working with him would be a significant challenge for me. As a student, his teaching inspired me and led me to develop my own teaching style, modeled after his for teaching mathematics and computer science courses. Sensitive to what I wanted to do after finishing my PhD, Professor Shapiro put me in contact with the Kenyon College Department of Mathematics, where I enjoyed an outstanding year. He supported my desire to return to California after that year and wrote a letter of recommendation that helped me move to California State University in Hayward, where I'm still teaching, and I should add after 42 years he's been there. Professor Shapiro and the other excellent mathematics professors and students at UCR prepared me for a career doing what I still love to do. I've always greatly appreciated the friendship and communication over the last 4 decades. I will always remain profoundly thankful for Professor Shapiro's guidance and inspiration in graduate school and during all of the years afterwards, with sympathy to all of the Shapiro family and to his colleagues and friends, Gary Lichtman and family. So, next will be a letter of Dr. Lou Lefton, who is a Director of Information Technology at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, and a former visiting assistant professor here at UCR, and also collaborator of Dr. Shapiro. The letter will be read by one of Vic's son, Dr. Arthur Shapiro, on Lou's behalf.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you all for coming, and these speeches are absolutely wonderful. And I think they speak for all my family. They're really quite touching. And I'll speak for Lou, who I last saw when I gave a colloquium at Georgia Tech in 2009. He was good enough to come. We had a very nice conversation at that time. So here's Lou's letter. In 1987, after I finished my PhD at the University of Illinois under the direction of Robert Kaufman, I was contacted by David Rush, who offered me a non-tenure track 2-year visiting assistant professorship at UCR. Nowadays, it would probably be called a postdoc. I would be working with Victor Shapiro. I was nervous since taking the visiting job would mean turning down the other tenure track offers. At that time, I wasn't familiar with Vic or his work, so I asked Kaufman. "You should go work with off-the-scale Vic," he said. "Why do you call him that?" I asked. Apparently, when Vic was recruited by Riverside, they used a standard salary at the UC system. However, the president decided he needed to go off the scale in order to get Vic. After I got to know Vic, I realized that Kaufman's description of him